Mayday! I'm going down! The desperate scream from the F-22 cockpit echoed through the entire control tower. Black smoke poured from the engine as the fighter jet tilted dangerously, about to nosedive into the runway. Ground crew scattered in panic. No one dared step forward. Suddenly, a calm female voice cut through the chaos. "Switch to manual bypass, now!" All eyes turned to a small technician in oil-stained coveralls. She grabbed the radio, voice steady. "This is Falcon 9. Follow my lead." The entire control tower fell silent. For 12 years, that call sign was thought to be gone forever. Reina Vasquez was 34 years old, with long brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She worked as a maintenance technician at the civilian airport, invisible among the mechanics and ground crew. Her daily routine was simple and repetitive. Pump fuel, clean windshields, change oil, inspect aircraft bodies for stress fractures. Nothing glamorous, nothing that drew attention. Her co-workers saw her as just another hard-working technician, nothing more. A young maintenance worker would laugh at her. "I bet you've never even sat in a real cockpit, have you?" Another colleague would sigh dismissively. What could a small woman like her possibly know about fighter jets? Reina would just smile quietly, never arguing back, and continue polishing cockpit glass with her calloused hands. She lived a simple life in a small rented room. No television, no family photos on the walls, no signs of a past life. But hidden under her bed was a wooden box. Inside that box were photographs from her Top Gun days, a call sign patch reading Falcon 9, and a silver aviation badge that few people ever earn. The truth was buried 12 years deep. During a training mission, her wingman had died in an accident while she was flight lead. The guilt consumed her. She requested discharge from the military and chose to live anonymously, convinced she didn't deserve to fly anymore. A co-worker later recalled, "I once saw her standing for hours staring at the sky, her eyes never leaving the white contrails overhead. I thought she was just daydreaming. Now I understand what she was really looking at." Every day, she watched military aircraft take off and land at the shared runway. Every day, she felt the pull of the sky calling to her. Every day, she forced herself to stay grounded, believing she had forfeited the right to fly when her wingman died. She knew every system on every aircraft that came through the facility. She could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. She could spot structural issues that other technicians missed. But she kept all of this knowledge to herself, hidden behind the simple identity of a maintenance worker who just happened to be very good at her job. The other workers never suspected that the quiet woman who changed their oil and cleaned their aircraft had once been one of the most skilled pilots in the United States Air Force. They never imagined that she could fly circles around most active pilots, even after 12 years on the ground. They had no idea that beneath her oil-stained coveralls beat the heart of someone who had once been called the best of the best, until the day when hiding was no longer an option. It was an ordinary afternoon at the airport. A routine Air Force demonstration was scheduled, featuring F-22 Raptors performing training exercises for visiting dignitaries. The crowd gathered to watch the sleek fighters show off their capabilities. Reina continued her work, trying to ignore the familiar sound of jet engines that still made her heart race. Then everything went wrong in an instant. One of the F-22s suddenly began trailing thick black smoke. The aircraft started shaking violently, its flight path becoming erratic and dangerous. The young pilot's voice crackled over the emergency frequency. "Mayday! Mayday, I'm going down. Engine failure. I'm losing control." Ground crews scattered in every direction, some running toward emergency stations, others simply fleeing the area. The control tower erupted in controlled panic as controllers tried to manage the crisis. "Emergency landing authorized on runway 27, came the urgent command from the tower. "Switch to auxiliary systems immediately." But the pilot's response was filled with terror. "Controls are frozen." "I can't access auxiliary. I'm losing altitude fast." The massive fighter jet was descending too quickly, its trajectory aimed directly at the main terminal building. Hundreds of lives were suddenly at risk. Reyna dropped her work tools and ran toward the backup radio station. Something inside her had awakened, something that had been dormant for 12 years. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Switch to manual bypass, now!" Everyone in the area turned to stare. She was just a maintenance technician in oil-stained coveralls. What could she possibly know about flying an F-22? But Reyna wasn't thinking about what people expected. She grabbed the radio with hands that suddenly remembered exactly what to do. "This is Falcon 9. Pilot, follow my lead exactly." The emergency frequency went completely silent for several heartbeats. Then the young pilot's voice returned, filled with disbelief. "Falcon 9? That's impossible. You disappeared 12 years ago. Everyone said you were dead." Reyna's voice became steady and professional, the voice of someone who had talked pilots through life-and-death situations before. "Hold heading 220. Reduce throttle to 40%. Engage manual bypass on hydraulic systems." "Roger. Falcon 9. Attempting manual bypass." "Good. Now listen carefully. You're going to lose some control authority, but the aircraft will respond. Trust your training and trust me." The F-22 was still smoking, still shaking, but its descent had stabilized slightly. The crowd below watched in terrified fascination as the drama played out above their heads. "Falcon 9, I'm still showing red lights across the board. Ignore the warning systems. Focus on airspeed and altitude. You're going to make a dead-stick approach to runway 27. No engine power on final approach." In the control tower, experienced controllers watched in amazement as the small woman in coveralls took command of a situation they couldn't handle. An old technician whispered to his colleague, "I watched her touch those radio controls like she remembered every single button. That's when I knew she wasn't just an ordinary maintenance worker." Step by step, with calm precision, Reyna guided the disabled fighter toward the runway. Her instructions were exact, professional, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had done this before. The F-22 approached the runway at a steep angle. No engine power, trailing smoke, but under control. "Falcon 9, I have the runway in sight." "Perfect. You're going to make it. Flare on my mark. Mark!" The fighter jet touched down hard but safely, its drag chute deploying as it rolled to a stop just short of the emergency vehicles racing to meet it. The airport fell silent, except for the sound of sirens and the settling metal of a cooling engine. The F-22 came to a complete stop on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles with flashing lights. Fire suppression foam covered the smoking engine as paramedics rushed toward the aircraft. The young pilot opened his canopy and climbed out, his legs shaking as his feet touched solid ground. His eyes immediately searched the crowd until they found Reyna standing near the radio station. He ran toward her, his face a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. You're really Falcon 9? The Falcon 9? Word spread through the airport like wildfire. The maintenance technician who saved the F-22. She's actually a Top Gun legend. Her co-workers stood in shocked silence. She's been cleaning our aircraft for years. And she was Falcon 9 this whole time? I made jokes about her never flying. God, I feel like an idiot." Reyna tried to disappear back into the crowd, pulling her cap down low. "I just wanted to live quietly. I left the sky behind a long time ago." But Commander Ross Hale, the Air Force unit leader, approached her with purpose. "Falcon 9, 12 years ago, you saved 4 pilots in a training accident. You've been blaming yourself for one loss ever since, haven't you? Today, you saved another life. That's 5 total. When are you going to stop punishing yourself?" The full story emerged through Ross's words. In 2012, Reyna had been at the top of her class at the Navy's elite fighter pilot school. Call sign Falcon 9 appeared in countless commendation reports. She was known for reflexes that seemed almost superhuman and an ability to remain calm under impossible pressure. But during a formation training exercise, her wingman had made a critical error in judgment. The resulting crash killed him instantly. As flight lead, Reyna blamed herself completely. She requested immediate discharge and disappeared from the military world entirely, choosing to work with aircraft but never again as a pilot. Now, standing on the tarmac with her secret exposed, there was no going back to anonymity. A young technician, who had worked alongside her for 2 years, approached hesitantly. "Reyna, I'm sorry. I said some stupid things about you not understanding aviation. I had no idea who you really were." Reyna shook her head. "You weren't wrong to treat me like an ordinary person. That's all I wanted to be. But you're not ordinary. You're a hero." "Heroes don't get their wingmen killed," Reyna replied quietly. Commander Ross overheard and stepped closer. "Heroes make split-second decisions that save lives, even when those decisions come with costs. Your wingman made his own choice that day. You can't carry that weight forever." Other airport workers began to gather around, their attitudes completely transformed. These were the same people who had dismissed her as just another technician hours earlier. The airport control supervisor approached. "Ma'am, I listened to your radio work during the emergency. The calmness in your voice, the precision of your instructions, only someone who's been through combat situations could maintain that level of control." A maintenance worker who had teased her about never flying real aircraft stood nearby with his head down. "I owe you an apology, ma'am." A big one. The young F-22 pilot, now safely on the ground and checked by paramedics, joined the group. "I want everyone to know something. What happened up there wasn't just good radio work. Falcon 9 talked me through a procedure that most pilots couldn't handle, even with full engine power. She saved my life with knowledge and skill that comes from years of elite training." As news crews arrived and the story began to spread beyond the airport, Reyna realized her 12 years of hiding were over. But for the first time in those 12 years, she wasn't sure she wanted to keep hiding. The young pilot extended his hand. "Ma'am, I don't know what happened in your past, but I know what happened today. You're the reason I'm going home to my family tonight." Reyna shook his hand, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel proud of her skills rather than ashamed of her past. The sky was calling to her again. The question was, would she finally answer? The official report simply stated, "F-22 pilot successfully handled emergency situation with ground support assistance." No mention of Reyna's name or call sign. That's how she wanted it. But in the airport cafeteria the next day, everything had changed. When Reyna entered for her lunch break, the entire room fell silent. Then, one by one, her co-workers stood up and nodded respectfully as she passed. The young F-22 pilot was waiting at a corner table. He stood when he saw her and placed his meal tray across from her usual seat. "I'm alive," Because of you. I'll never forget that. Raina sat down hesitantly. You would have figured it out. Good pilots always do. With respect, ma'am, I was 30 seconds from crashing into the terminal building. You didn't just give me instructions. You gave me back my confidence when I was completely panicked. Commander Ross Hale approached their table and addressed the room. I want everyone to remember what happened yesterday. Falcon 9 didn't die in that accident 12 years ago. She just chose to serve quietly. And yesterday, she came back to save another life. There was no applause, no dramatic speeches, but the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. From that day forward, when people looked at Raina, they saw something different. The oil stains on her coveralls looked less like messiness and more like the marks of someone who understood aircraft at a level few people ever reach. A senior mechanic approached her later. Ma'am, we've got a young pilot coming in next week for some advanced training. Would you consider maybe talking to him about emergency procedures? Raina paused, considering. I'm not an active pilot anymore. No, ma'am. But you're something better. You're someone who knows how to keep pilots alive when everything goes wrong. That afternoon, as Raina worked on routine maintenance, she noticed something different. The younger technicians were watching her work more carefully, paying attention to techniques they had previously ignored. She realized they weren't seeing her as just a maintenance worker anymore. They were seeing her as someone who could teach them things about aviation that couldn't be learned from manuals. For 12 years, she had hidden her expertise. Now, maybe it was time to share it. Not as Falcon 9, the legendary pilot, but as Raina Vasquez, the woman who understood that the most important skill in aviation isn't flying. It's bringing people home safe. For 12 years, Raina Vasquez kept her call sign hidden in a wooden box under her bed. People saw her as just another airport maintenance technician, someone ordinary, unremarkable, easily overlooked. But an F-22 emergency pulled her back into the sky, reminding everyone that heroes don't disappear. They just choose to serve quietly. The lesson is profound. Never judge anyone by their current role. There are people walking among us carrying histories we could never imagine. Sometimes the most extraordinary individuals are hiding in the most ordinary places. Sometimes the person changing oil in your aircraft used to be the best pilot in the sky. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal who people really are underneath their everyday masks. If you believe heroes can be hiding in plain sight, leave a dot in the comments. And if you believe these quiet stories of hidden courage deserve to be remembered, subscribe to SN Quiet Stories.